So, hello and welcome everyone to this event, which is the first webinar that we are hosting with the Swedish WEAll Hub. So we started the Swedish Hub this autumn in September with some events, and we had some Zoom gatherings, and then so this is our first more public event that we're doing, and we have together with us today, we have Lisa Hough-Stewart, who is the interim director of the WEAll Scotland Hub, and so we're looking very much forward to listen to Lisa today and to tell the story about your journey with the hub in Scotland and the challenges that you have faced, etc. I will just say a little bit about some other things first. We who started this is come from another project called Scenario 2030, which is soon ending. So we have decided to. We thought that WEAll was a very good bridge to continue our work. So we're soon, when we're ending this project, we're going to do like a big vision festival that will take place in Katrineholm on the 17th to the 19th of March. And we will also then take the opportunity to have the first in-person meeting for the WEAll Sweden Hub. So you should definitely check out our social media with Scenario 2030. We will post all the information there about this. And also in the end, we also will send out a contact list where you can write your contact information if you want to have information about the Wellbeing Economy Alliance and the activities that we do. Yeah, so thank you very much. I'm just going to hand it over to you, Lisa.
Thank you. Thanks, Cecilia. It's brilliant to be here and to meet you all. We'll hopefully have lots of time for discussion later, but you're listening to me for a while first. So the first thing to say is I've got a really strong Scottish accent and I speak really fast when I'm excited, and I'm excited about the stuff I'm going to talk to you about. So if you can't understand me, somebody raise your hand or put it in the chat, because I know it's a problem if English isn't your first language, and I apologise in advance. I will try my best to be slow-ish and clear. I'd also love to know who you are. So just in this next few minutes, if you want to post in the chat where in Sweden you are, or if you're not in Sweden, where you are, and if you're affiliated with any organisations, or just what drew you to come along. I know that the Swedish WEAll Hub team has quite a few people already, around 7, but there's lots of you here, so I'd just love to know who you are, because I'm nosy. I'll start sharing my screen now. I'll speak for 20 to 30 minutes about the story of WEAll Scotland. I'll start off by talking a bit about what is a wellbeing economy and what is WEAll, the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, just briefly, and then I'll really focus on the story of what we've been working on as a hub in Scotland and the context in Scotland, in the hope that that's useful to you in Sweden as you try to get involved in this work of building a wellbeing economy, and particularly in the establishment of this very exciting new Swedish hub. So Cecilia and I first met when I was in Stockholm last year at the UN Stockholm Plus 50 conference, and we did a workshop together, a public workshop about alternative economic ideas. And I think that was kind of the seed being planted that then became a hub, some of the people who came along that day, and certainly the connection that we made. So I'm really excited to be here now and have seen that evolve really quite quickly, just a few months since those first conversations around Stockholm Plus 50 last year. So what I'll talk about, a wee bit about me, what's a wellbeing economy, what is WEAll, and what are our hubs all about, then the Scotland story, and a little bit of the bigger picture in Scotland. And then you can make your own judgments, because I'm not an expert on the Swedish context, into how much of that reads across to your political and public awareness environment. And then hopefully we'll have lots of time to chat at the end. So tiny bit about me. I don't want to make this too much about me, but I, at the moment, as Cecilia said, I'm speaking to you tonight as the interim director of the Scottish Hub. I'm covering for our director, Jimmy, while he's off on parental leave. But my day job, my full-time job is actually in the global WEAll team, where I focus on the implementation of wellbeing economy ideas with policymakers all around the world, and also on our implementation as an organisation of wellbeing economy ideas and our organisational culture. So I've been part of the WEAll team since we established the organisation back in 2018. That's also when the Scotland Hub was the first hub to be founded. And before that, I was working at Oxfam Scotland on campaigns and communications around inequality, climate change, refugee rights. And I was working there with Catherine Trebek, who some of you might have heard of. She's a real leading thinker in the wellbeing economy space, one of the co-founders of WEAll. And she was establishing WEAll essentially and the Wellbeing Economy Governments Partnership while we were working together at Oxfam. And I got to do some things with her about this and thought it was the answer to everything. I was doing this work on climate campaigns, inequality campaigns, women's rights, but Oxfam was kind of, as a big NGO, treating them as separate things. And then Catherine's work on the economic system just felt like it brought all of these crises and all of these problems together. And it really galvanized me that if we could make an impact at that level, we could make a move towards fixing all the things that we want to fix rather than tackling them separately. So there was one day when Catherine came over to my desk at Oxfam and said, we've got some money to do this wellbeing economy thing properly, and I think there's a job for you. And I followed her, and that was that. We Anna Gomez is here in the room as well, is my colleague in the global team, and we were the original team along with Catherine and Michael and another guy called Diego, and our wonderful executive chair Stuart Wallace, and now we're a team, the global team of 12, so still a lot smaller than people think that we are, but I'll tell you a bit more about WEAll in a second. So that's evolved from being about me to being about WEAll already. So this definition up on the screen here is really at the heart of what we mean when we talk about a wellbeing economy, an economic system that delivers social justice on a healthy planet. That's the purpose of it. That's what it's designed for at the outset. And WEAll has come up with these 5 wellbeing needs. This was a really in-depth exercise to get to these really simple statements that we went through with members of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance network back near the beginning. So we basically think of these as the design principles of a wellbeing economy. So dignity, purpose, nature, participation, and fairness. And you can see the definitions of those there, so I won't read them all out for you. But I would just invite you to ask yourself and wonder, how would things look different if these were the tests, if these were the design questions at the heart of every economic decision, every policy decision, if everything that was being spent had to be sort of run through this screen to make sure that it was contributing to all 5 of these needs that we collectively have. And that's something really important to stress, that word collective, because well-being can very often be about or be seen to be about an individual's well-being, and a lot of well-being initiatives are actually about helping people to cope with problems in the current system. But the Wellbeing Economy Alliance and the idea of a wellbeing economy is about our collective well-being and a system that's designed to deliver well-being for all, not about well-being to fix the challenges of the current system, which, especially in corporate environments, well-being initiatives, even though they can be good and useful in this current system, are very often about helping people cope with the problems created in that system. So to go a little bit deeper on what we mean by a wellbeing economy and what the change is that we're pushing for as the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, there's these 4 principles or sort of corners of the jigsaw that we speak about, and they are purpose, what I just talked about, the design principles of the economic system and businesses and all institutions. Prevention, that policies in particular should be prevention-led and directed at tackling root causes so that we don't just deal with harm, we prevent harm from happening to people and to the environment. Redistribution, which isn't as intuitive as the other 3 here, but basically what we mean there is that the economy should be set up in a way that avoids vast inequalities from happening in the first place. So community wealth building, which you might have heard of, is one example of a redistributive economic approach that basically is set up to ensure that the gains from economic activity stay within a local area and benefit the community in that place. So it's about alternative business models, alternative employment practices, and alternative ways of decision making that are very much based on fairness. So it might help to think about this in contrast with redistribution. We need quite a bit of redistribution of wealth, of assets within the current system when you look at the inequalities that are there. But we're ideally talking about a system that has pre-distribution baked in so that you don't need to fix inequalities after the fact. And the fourth one, people-powered, is hopefully fairly obvious, that people should have a meaningful role in decision-making. And this is probably the biggest part of my work. We have a policy design guide that is all about the how of participatory policymaking. And for the last couple of years, I've been working with our hubs to pilot that policy design process with local governments in a number of different places. And I'll say a little bit more about the Scottish pilot in a minute. So that's the whistle-stop tour of what do we mean by a wellbeing economy. You might have a lot of questions about that, especially if you've never heard about this stuff before. So feel free to start putting questions in the chat, but I'll try and ignore the chat until we come to the end. So WEAll, as an organisation, as I said, was set up 5 years ago because it was clear that a lot of the answers about how we do this stuff and what it looks like were already out there. But it was a very disjointed community movement that was working towards new economic paradigms and calling it lots of different things, which is great. There's so much diversity within the movement. But we always set up the Wellbeing Economy Alliance to try and bring that movement together and build momentum. We talk in Scotland about building unstoppable momentum for economic system change and to change the debate, because it also felt like these conversations about economic system change were not happening in the mainstream. And by and large, they're still not, but we're really making headway 5 years after we were first established. So this is our mission: to change the debate and build momentum for economic transformation so that economies around the world deliver shared well-being for people and planet by 2040. My one slide is stuck. And this is as simply as we can possibly make it our theory of change and the different areas of work that we have for this system change that we want to achieve. And we use this metaphor of a tree. So these different bits of our work are that we think the knowledge that's already out there and new knowledge about what the new system looks like and all its component parts and how to get there needs to feed in alongside narratives and new stories to feed power bases that must be grown that are advocating for economic system change. So that is a very simplified version of our theory of change. We can share maybe by email after this through Cecilia and our colleagues the strategy document that's got a lot more detail about this if you're interested in finding out more about what we do. And this is the numbers of who we are. We've got organisational members, over 350. I think this is a few weeks out of date and there's more people joining every week. Over 2,800 individuals who've joined the network. We've got amazing ambassadors and spokespeople, academics, policymakers. There's 6 national governments in the Wellbeing Economy Governments Partnership. Scotland is one of them, alongside Wales, Finland, Iceland, New Zealand and Canada. That's a partnership very much amongst the governments that WEAll doesn't help to run, but we did help to instigate it, and we have a close partnership with them. So those governments have a stated ambition of building wellbeing economies, and what they do is policy labs a few times a year that their officials come together and exchange learning and exchange ideas and strategies for actually making this happen in practice. And we very often take part in those, or we facilitate for speakers and experts to support the governments in that work. And the hubs, the 13 hubs around the world, I think it might be even more than that now. Anna can correct that in the chat, because this slide, as I said, is a few weeks old and there's a lot happening with our hubs around the world. But as I'll explain when I tell the story of Scotland, basically a WEAll hub is trying to do everything that I just explained at that level. So local level, but in the case of Sweden, we're talking about a country. Some of our hubs are at a devolved level, like Scotland and Wales. Obviously we're part of the UK, but we still are a country. We also have state level hubs in the US, for example. We have an Iberia hub, which is Spain and Portugal collaborating together. So there's different layers and levels of location that those hubs can exist at, but essentially it is a team being established to advance this work and be the WEAll movement for that place. And Anna Gomez, who's here, is the brilliant hubs lead in the global team, and she helps to make sure that the hubs are connected to the global level and that there's knowledge and collaboration in both directions, and that they're connected to each other, so that there's value in being part of this bigger thing rather than a national movement that's trying to do this from scratch. Okay, so we'll shift now. I'll remove my global hat and put on a Saltire flag Scottish hat to tell you a bit more of the story of WEAll Scotland. So I've mentioned Catherine Trebek already, and she's really central to this story. Catherine is Australian, but had lived in Scotland for a long time, was working at Oxfam with me there. She's since moved back to Australia, and I and Scotland are really missing her. But way back in 2017, Catherine was really at the core of this as an academic and a sort of activist academic at Oxfam who was advancing these wellbeing economy ideas. She was building a network around her of people who were interested in economic system change in Scotland. So she was always convening little lunch clubs and sort of informal groups and events to advance this work. And I was usually there as well. And then in 2018, around the same time as we set up the global amplification team that Anna and I are part of, we also created the core team in Scotland. So this was without any funding, purely voluntary, but Catherine and I were both working full time for WEAll at global level, and we gave a day of our time to the Scotland core team. So it was a bunch of volunteers saying, let's actually set up an organisation, let's put a bit more shape around this and act as WEAll Scotland. And that was how we became the first official hub of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. So for the next couple of years, we had small amounts of funding, usually just for really discrete projects or to do a particular event. And we achieved charity status in Scotland in that time. So we did actually form as a SCIO, which is a particular type of charity, but all you need to know is we set up legally as a charitable organisation with a board of trustees. So over the period from 2018 to 2020, we were really formalising the organisation and people's role within it. And eventually, right at the end of 2020, we, after doing lots of fundraising, managed to get enough core funding to recruit people and set up a staff team. So now today, WEAll Scotland is very much an organisation in its own right. And I'll tell you a bit more in a second about who is still involved in that. So here we are. The team today, these are the 3 staff team members. So Jimmy Paul is the director, who I am doing an impersonation of today while he is enjoying his time with his new baby boy. Francis Rayner is the communications lead, and Dr. Lucas Boons is the policy and engagement lead. So all 3 of them joined the team in 2021. And they're still with us now and hopefully will be for a long time. We're hoping to expand the team to at least 5, and we're fundraising at the moment to keep the current team going and to hopefully expand it. We also have a really active board of 8 women. By accident, they're all women, amazing women, which is really nice. We have had men on the board over time, but at the moment it's all women. And some of them have been there from the very beginning, back in 2017. Including Doreen Grove, who's chair of the board, and she's also head of open government at the Scottish Government. And the board are super active and really get hands-on with strategy work, projects, reviewing funding applications, all sorts of things. And we have an amazing volunteer network. One of those volunteers, Joey, is just awesome. He gives about a day a week of his time on top of his day job to WEAll Scotland, and he's a comms person in his day job, and he does some comms stuff for us, but he is the volunteer coordinator. And last time I checked, but again, this is a group that's growing all the time, there were about 10 active volunteers working on specific projects and pieces of work supported by Joey and with the staff team. And finally, we also have freelancers who work with us on specific projects. The staff team are very focused on the core work of WEAll Scotland, and usually it's freelancers who are associates of WEAll Scotland that will carry out project work that's more sort of time bound. Okay, so this is the WEAll Scotland specific theory of change. So you'll recognise the bigger global theory of change within this, but this is the way that we've interpreted it for Scotland to inform our strategy and our work plan. So basically, we've got these 3 different levels of change, and we believe that we need to be working at all 3 of these levels at the same time in Scotland in order to have an impact on the economic system. So at the big landscape level, that's the context and paradigm that we operate in. And what we want to do there, this is where narratives come in, is tell a new story about economic success and help people ask better questions. In the policy space, the rules, the policies, the institutions that govern our lives, we are developing and promoting policy design for a wellbeing economy. And that's where the policy design guide comes in, with our allies, which is our member network in Scotland. And then at the grassroots level, which you can see all the different types of groups that we would class as being within that, we want to nurture and support grassroots innovators who are demonstrating that building a wellbeing economy, or building one aspect of a wellbeing economy, is possible. We want to connect them to each other to be greater than the sum of their parts, and we want to amplify their examples. So our team that I just spoke about is working at all 3 of these levels all the time. Broadly speaking, Francis as comms lead very much leads on the narrative, and Lucas as policy and engagement lead very much leads on the policy regime stuff, and everybody is working on the grassroots and the connections between the 3 layers. So there we go. I've just said all that, so I won't go any further. And I'll just say something briefly about the project. So I mentioned we've got projects on the go. We've got core funding from one funder for our staff team, but we've got lots of projects in addition to that, which are usually quite small amounts of funding and quite short timescales. But this is just an example of a few of the organisations that we are working with. And what that tends to mean is that we will partner with an organisation to go on a bit of a journey with them about what a wellbeing economy would mean for them. How can they implement wellbeing economy ideas and principles and be part of this change in Scotland? Because building a new system isn't just about influencing the government, it's about working with actors all through the system. So Scottish FA is our football association. We've been doing a project with them about the role of football and sport in building a wellbeing economy and what they as an organisation could do to embed wellbeing economy principles. Creative Scotland is our arts funding and development organisation. Been doing the same with them. Foundation Scotland is a funder. Cairngorms National Park, which is obvious, social innovation partnerships, and Love Letham, which is the photo there of the little sign, is the project that I've been most involved with in the last little while, because it's one of the pilots of the policy design guide that we are carrying out with Perth and Kinross Council. So that policy design process is all about genuine participation with the people who are impacted by policy being built into every stage, and having really in-depth visioning work with people living in a community be at the core of policy design. So we've very specifically there been working with children and young people in the Letham area of Perth, and we carried out in-depth visioning work with them, and the project is joint with the council. That's now been running for a year and a half, and the funding's been continued for us to carry on that process and really try and make sure that the vision that children in that area have for what a good life looks like for them is informing policy design and budget setting within the council. So I can say lots more about that, but I'll just move on to the next one. And if anyone's curious about that particular project or the policy design process, we can delve into that in the discussion.
And
these are just a few of the 60 plus, and again, growing all the time, allies that we have in the WEAll Scotland network. So I mentioned that WEAll Global has lots of organisations in its network, and the Scottish ones are also part of the global network. If you join the Scottish network, you're also a global member and you're part of that global community. But you can see some of the diversity here. You won't know these organisations at a glance, as lots of people in Scotland would, but you can tell from the names and the words that are being used here that there's a big variety within our network, and everything we do is with and through our allies network, and we involve them in all of our work. Everything's about collaboration and partnership. So a quick summary of what we've achieved so far as a hub over the last few years. This is really just since 2019, to be honest, when we were set up as a formal charity. Got the staff team in place. We've helped to secure commitments from the Scottish Government around lots of different policy areas, and that's been through campaigns with our allies. We've been able to secure manifesto commitments to monitoring wellbeing economy, to appointing a wellbeing economy ambassador, to the exploration of a future generations bill. So we've been pretty successful in our campaigning and influencing of the Scottish Government. We've built our network, contributed to other people's policy initiatives. So what has really struck me just in the few weeks that I've been fully immersed in the Scotland team again, because I should have mentioned as well that I was very much part of the Scotland team, and then I went off on maternity leave. And then when I came back, I wasn't so much part of the Scotland team anymore because I was just doing my global job. So in the last few weeks, being really in the Scotland team again, it's amazing to me how many seats at tables we are being offered. The Scottish Government and other public bodies and researchers and think tanks all want WEAll's perspective to be part of the conversation that's driving policy design and policy initiatives. So next Monday, I'm going to spend a day at Scottish Parliament as part of like a working group of 10 people helping to design feminist foreign policy proposals for the government, for example. We're being invited into those spaces now. We're not having to push our way in because we're seen as a go-to organisation for that sort of input. We are the official conveners of the cross-party parliamentary group on wellbeing economy within the Scottish Parliament. So we do the secretariat for that group. This was a slightly old slide. I'm sure this was even more in 2022 because we also get a lot of speaking requests. We do a lot of public speaking about what a wellbeing economy is and workshops about how organisations can embed it for themselves. We produce reports exploring the transition and what it looks like. We partner with others. A lot of that's the projects that I mentioned, but also more informal partnerships to help other organisations embed wellbeing economy thinking. And we've developed our vision. We've developed that theory of change. We've got lots of comms assets that others can use. And Francis does a great job with media work, getting media coverage and placing opinion pieces, especially from unusual suspects. So the type of voices that you might not expect to hear talking about this sort of thing. So we've been able to work with business leaders and have them promote the wellbeing economy. We did some research work with the brewing community, so beer makers in Scotland, and then did some media work with them that got lots of coverage because that's kind of alcohol is a big industry in Scotland. So we're trying to partner with everybody in all different sectors and not have this be seen as sort of civil society only campaign. And Cecilia also asked me to talk about challenges. So there obviously have been challenges in this time, and especially I guess in the time when I was involved in the sort of early days, when you're setting up something brand new, there's always lots of learning, and maybe this is something we can dig into a bit more in our conversation. But the things that came to mind for me when I was reflecting on what the challenges have been were, first of all, the fact that we had to rely on volunteers in the early days. And I think that always comes with its challenges, but we probably could have been better prepared for the risks of being really reliant on volunteers and on specific people in particular. So over the lifetime of WEAll Scotland, before we had any funding, there were individuals who really threw themselves into it and gave it their all on a voluntary basis, who then suddenly, either because they got a job or they moved or they just burnt out with it, or things change when you're a volunteer. It's not sustainable to overcommit as a volunteer, but we kind of came to rely on the overcommitment of volunteers. And then when we lost those people, there were big gaps, and other people then had to overcommit to fill the gaps. And until we had funding, that was really challenging. So I think the advice that I would share from that would be to make sure that the volunteers who are involved are volunteering at a sustainable level that feels good for them, that they're getting as much back as they are giving, and that there's enough volunteers who are given in a sort of equal level to the hub for it not to be a big risk that if you lose one person, lots of things will fall apart. And then the next phase of that, and it's kind of related, was it was a bit tricky to navigate the shift from being completely volunteer-led to hiring in a staff team. And to be honest, we're still navigating some of the mess of that. There was a lot of informal ways of working and structures in place when it was volunteer only that's persisted even to now. And just in the last couple of weeks, I've been speaking to some of the board members and the rest of the staff team to just really name, like, we don't need that group. That group was just there for us way back when this was a really informal thing. And now it's making some people feel excluded because they don't understand what it is and why they're not in it. But I think we could have been more intentional earlier about how it would feel for staff team coming in and for new volunteers to come in later. And there's some people who've been around for a really long time doing things a certain way that made sense then, but maybe doesn't make sense for a new era. So I think there's a real understanding now that we're in a fresh era for WEAll Scotland and we're putting new processes and ways of working in place. But that was just kind of allowed to evolve in a messy and organic way. And I think it actually needed some attention and time when it was happening or before it was happening. So if the Swedish hub, or when the Swedish hub gets funding and is able to hire people, I would just advise to be really intentional about what that means for everybody and what needs to change in the organisation, because it will be a big change. This might be a Scottish specific thing, but it's a really big thing for us, and you might have your own political hot potatoes in Sweden. So I thought I might name it. We have a raging constitutional debate in Scotland about whether Scotland should be independent from the United Kingdom. And the governing party in Scotland is a pro-independence party, and they are the ones who have been championing a wellbeing economy. But we as a charity and in principle as an organisation and our movement need to stay neutral in that debate. And we've been accused by both sides of being biased towards the other side, which I think is usually a good sign that you're achieving the neutrality that you're aiming for. But that's something that we are constantly having to balance. And that, to be honest, sometimes I'm not sure we've got it completely right, but that's just the reality of operating in Scotland and trying to work with everybody across the political divide. But our political divide is much more constitutional than ideological. And funding, this is the giant one. The amount of energy and time, largely volunteer energy and time, that has gone into fundraising and is still going into fundraising is enormous. And I'm not going to sugarcoat that, but we are now in a place where we can feel pretty optimistic about our future as an organisation and our financial sustainability, which is really testament to all that hard work that people have done. But I would just say, don't underestimate how time consuming it is to pursue funding in this space. On the plus side, I think now a new hub today, like the Swedish hub, benefits from the fact that WEAll has existed for this amount of time, is known that the wellbeing economy agenda is progressing, that WEAll Global is financially sustainable, which it wasn't really. We've been in this parallel journey of WEAll Global and WEAll Scotland, where Global's been fundraising as well. And now the global team is in a position to support hubs with fundraising in a way that it just couldn't have been in the very early days. So I'm already speaking to Amanda within the Swedish core team about EU funding possibilities that hopefully will be available to all the EU-based hubs. And our colleague Michael, who leads on funding, is dedicating quite a lot of his time to helping to get the hubs funded. So I am optimistic that your fundraising journey will be smoother for lots of reasons than the Scottish one. Okay, nearly at time, but I'll just speak for a couple of minutes about the Scottish context more broadly, because I think it's important to sort of recognise how contextual this work is. And very obviously, we can't just cut and paste approaches from one hub to another. And you will have your own context to navigate, but it's going to be really important that you spend time analysing that and where you fit within it. So On the left side of my wee yellow line here, I'll do the plus sides of the Scottish context for doing this work. And then on the right-hand side of the line, I'll do some of the challenges. So broadly speaking, we're lucky to have a relatively progressive political environment. And that's in terms of public opinion as well as the political parties. It's fairly well known and documented and sort of backed up with opinion polls and stuff that compared to the UK as a whole, Scotland is more socially progressive and sort of left-leaning. So obviously we do have the Conservative Party here, but the Scottish Conservatives are noticeably more centre ground than the British Conservative Party, for example. Within that, we've had the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, who announced she was resigning today, and I am not ashamed to say I shed some tears over that this morning. She has been an incredible champion of the Wellbeing Economy agenda and a very articulate champion, not just in Scotland, but globally, and has really been instrumental to Scotland playing a leadership role in the Wellbeing Economy Government's partnership that I mentioned earlier on. So Scotland holds the Secretariat for the Wellbeing Economy Government's group, and our chief economist is absolutely 100% bought in and is really driving that work in terms of making it happen on the ground as well. I shouldn't have used acronyms, that's bad practice, sorry. The NPF is our National Performance Framework. So we have actually got a National Performance Framework that has got wellbeing at its core. It's also got the words inclusive growth in there far too many times, which we are always pushing to reposition, but we've got a performance framework that essentially is supposed to be, this is what success looks like for Scotland, that is pretty well aligned to a wellbeing economy vision. Now, that ambition is not actually playing out all the time. There's an implementation gap, but we've got the framework. And we also now, as of just a few months ago, we have a wellbeing monitor where there's a team within the Scottish Government who are doing lots of data and analysis of everything in Scotland through a wellbeing lens. And I also think the size of the country, a population of around 6 million people, makes it sort of easy to talk about making an impact as a small organisation. It's a lot more feasible to connect with people and get things done in a country this size, which is a pretty small pond, than it is for our colleagues who are trying to work on a project for the whole of the US, for example. We have a California hub. I mean, compare the size of California to Scotland. California, even though it's a state, is the third largest economy in the world. So I think size really matters in this space. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the founding nations of the Wellbeing Economy Government's partnership were all pretty small countries. Iceland is tiny even compared to Scotland, and that's a place where this agenda is really taking root as well. And the last point on this is the public discourse is really shifting in Scotland. So we had a big conference in November as a hub, the Wealth of Nations 2.0 conference, and that's the third time we've held it. And the last time was in January 2020, just before COVID. And I was trying to sit back and really reflect on what's shifted in that time. And it's kind of unbelievable how much the phrase wellbeing economy is just part of sort of our language in Scotland, especially amongst the policymakers and change makers who are coming along to our conference. So there's lots of frustration in our allies network that things aren't moving even faster. But I think actually the fact that the wellbeing economy is bedded into the national psyche now as something that we want to be moving towards is really exciting. And there's hopefully things that other hubs can learn from that. One example of this just from this week is that we've had a consortium of landowners who have published a report basically trying to demonstrate the ways that private land contributes to a wellbeing economy. Now, there's all sorts of problems with that, but the plus side of it is that's a group that is feeling pressure to justify themselves in wellbeing economy terms, which, yes, this might be wellbeing economy washing or something, but actually that's a really good sign that we're getting somewhere, that we're the club that people want to be part of and feel like they need to sort of justify themselves as being aligned with. On the downside, complexities of devolution, I've talked about the political neutrality stuff. Also the fact that the Scottish Government only has so much power. There are certain powers that are reserved to Westminster, to the UK, and we have almost no influence as a hub, and we do pretty much no work to try and influence Westminster. The implementation gap, as I've mentioned before, the ambition and the rhetoric is there, but we're not seeing it feed through to to policy and not seeing the policy coherence yet that we would hope for. So it's important for us to keep the pressure on our government as well as praising progress. There's a lack of party unity within the governing party. This is especially important now that Nicola Sturgeon has stepped down. Because the Scottish National Party is an independence party, it's got a really broad spectrum of people with different ideologies within it. And we've struggled a bit in recent months with a finance minister who's much more small c conservative within the SNP compared to Nicola Sturgeon and others within the party. So who comes next after Nicola Sturgeon is a really big question today for us. We weren't expecting her to step down so soon. And she, as such a strong leader, has been holding the party together, even though there's all this diversity within it. And hopefully there won't be a big change of direction on wellbeing economy, but it's not impossible. So that is a bit of a risk. And Brexit. I'm doing lots of work in my global role at the EU level too. And it always makes me a bit sad to see the momentum that's building in the EU around the wellbeing economy and to know that Scotland's not part of it. So every single local authority in Scotland, we had a majority voting to remain in the European Union. So even though the UK as a whole voted out, Scotland very unanimously and overwhelmingly did not want to leave the EU. And we're still navigating that and what it means for Scotland, but that has obviously sort of happened and is still happening in the period that the hub has existed, and it's a political reality that we're having to contend with. Okay, that's more than enough of listening to me. Let's stop sharing the screen and I'll open up the floor for questions or comments. But Cecilia, did you want to say anything else before we do that?
Thank you so much, Lisa. So yeah, I think I will just start with a question myself, because so I'm curious about the WEAll government part. Like how did that start? Like how do you reach out to a government? Because that's something that feels kind of, for us, it feels very far away, especially now, because our government doesn't really feel like they would be so open to listening to that. But like if we would have a more progressive government, still, it's like, how do you even begin that conversation?
Yeah, good. That's a really good question. I think actually that felt quite natural. I'm just going to be honest that for some of us within Scotland, we had been working for quite a long time in a sort of policy advocacy space. So for Catherine and I, our work in Oxfam, we had connections already, and we were really used to designing campaigns and contacting politicians, arranging meetings with ministers. So it felt like it was sort of within our comfort zone already, to be totally honest with you. So it might be that you specifically try to reach out to people who are already in that kind of space in Sweden, who might be aligned with you, and get them involved with the hub. That might be one way to do it, rather than feeling like you've got this huge learning curve of how to do political advocacy work if it doesn't feel like there's anyone within your team that is their sort of comfort zone and skill set. So that would be one thing I would say. But also, anybody can and should sort of use their democratic voice and access their politicians as well. So what we've always done, and what I would always advise, is a combination of inside and outside advocacy. So a combination of relationship building, not just with politicians, but really importantly with their staff and with civil servants and people who are not elected, but are just there doing the work of government all the time. Because actually it's through those people being champions of the wellbeing economy in Scotland that change has happened and the politicians have helped to be convinced. So that's the kind of inside bit. And the outside part is campaigns where you might want to get public support for an open letter calling for something from the government, for example. Or you might want to stage an event and invite politicians along to it and do sort of front-facing stuff where you're putting them on a platform and asking them to respond to questions and demands. There's lots of different tactics, and when I was at Oxfam, I used to sort of train campaigners in how to speak to politicians. So I'm very happy to share some of those toolkits and stuff, and help you guys come up with an approach that would feel right for the Swedish hub. But I think that first point I made about reaching out to people that are already in that space in Sweden and trying to bring them in and make them part of your team might be a sort of shortcut to get there as well.
Thank you. That's very interesting to hear. So do we have any questions? Like, so you can raise your hand with there's the reactions you can press, and we already have a question here. Chaim?
Yeah. Hello. Thanks for the the very interesting input from Scotland. I think it's really interesting and beneficial for the Swedish context as well. And in that sense, I was also wondering where did most of your funding come from? Was it from specific sources, or and was it kind of, because you mentioned that it was both big sums and smaller sums? I don't know how the process there looked. Was it, okay, we'll apply for this smaller sum of money and then try to get going? Or was there a kind of strategy behind that?
Yeah, so the core funding, which is the sort of big funding that pays the staff salaries and pays for our office and everything, comes from one foundation that's a UK-based foundation who were hoping to get another 2 years of core funding from. The other work has been on a project basis, as I mentioned. So a lot of those organisations that I said we're doing projects with, they pay for that themselves. So it's kind of like consultancy work, which has obviously been quite strategic, and we've sort of built up that offer. So Foundation Scotland is a funder, which is actually now about to give us a grant for core funding, but they've been paying us as a consultant to come in and work with their board and work with their staff to help train them essentially in wellbeing economy ideas and embed that into their practice. So the smaller amounts that I mentioned from right at the beginning was like, we wanted to put on a conference and we went out to sponsors and got like a cooperative business to sponsor the event for like £2,000 so that we could get a venue, that sort of tiny micro level of funding. So we've been strategic about funding, but we've put in a lot of funding applications that have not been successful as well. So there's always an element of being opportunistic when it comes to funding as well. But we've got that blended model of sort of core foundation funding and kind of consultancy level project work as well.
Maybe a short follow-up question. So what kind of projects would that be then? Or do you have the impression that some kind of projects were more popular than others? I know that's very context specific as well, but
yeah, I think it's organisations who want to understand what a wellbeing economy means for them, and they want support as they go on a journey of trying to change so that they are part of this new system. We've done that with Funder, with the Football Association, with local authorities, with a business partner. So obviously there's lots of diversity within that, but that by and large is what the work is, that we call project, that probably in a classical sense is sort of consultancy. It looks more like consultancy than sort of grant funding. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
So any other questions? You can also put a question in the chat if you're a bit shy, but of course we prefer to hear you ask the question. Yeah, Manda.
Hey, Lisa. Well, thank you so much. It was super interesting to get such detailed information about like how much you managed to do in just a few years. I was wondering how much you've reached out to the different communities in Scotland, and how this framework you've built, how that's kind of got input from different communities there.
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and something I probably should have talked about. We've done a lot of workshops, usually because we've been invited, but sometimes because we live in a place and trying to sort of embed where we are. We've done like what is a wellbeing economy workshops for lots of different locations in Scotland, and tried to bring that in and have brought that very much into our strategy. As I mentioned, that visioning work that we do like in Perth with the children and young people, we do that sort of visioning work, which is the first stage of the policy design guide with different community development trusts. I've done a few workshops just here in my local community because I'm want to because I live here. But also our allies network is really important in this because lots of them are very much community based and working within their communities. So we also rely on them to sort of the input that they have to our strategy. Our strategy was completely co-designed with our allies, and that's groups like the Poverty Alliance, which is a network of hubs in the most deprived areas of Scotland that exists to sort of tackle poverty and inequality, and they fed into our strategy, and it's always this sort of iterative basis. So we do some outreach as WEAll Scotland, but we also, there's a lot more reach through our allies, and then we depend on them to feed that into the strategy and decision making.
Nice. Just a follow-up question. Has the government itself organized any of these kind of, not sure what you call it, like a citizens assembly or?
Yeah, we had a series of, the Citizens Assembly has now finished. Hopefully it's going to happen again, but we had a Citizens Assembly process that came from the Scottish Government, and actually Doreen, who's the chair of WEAll Scotland, in her role as the head of open government in Scotland, was really involved with that process. Catherine Trebek was involved as a speaker and sort of helping to design some of the Citizens Assembly processes. That was bigger than the economy, that was for everything. And we are now, along with lots of our allies, helping to champion the recommendations to government that came out of the Citizens Assembly, because we see that as a bit of a mandate, essentially, that the government should be responsive to. And some of them they have been, and some of them not yet. So we want to make sure that the Citizens Assembly wasn't like a one-off thing. And it's one of the things we advocate for, that it's built in as an ongoing part of our system, and that the recommendations that came from the first one are embedded.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. So there's a question in the chat here from Anne. How do you in short describe what WEAll is? So for a person who asks you, is it about leaving the GDP measurement as a welfare goal? But what more can you say for a very short description?
Yeah, the killer question. Yeah, so I say that the economy, when you really get down to it, is about how we produce and provide for each other. It's and that should be about us all being well and being able to thrive. When you think of the type of society you want to live in, how do we set up the economy to deliver that kind of society? A society where everybody's flourishing and where nature is well. And some things will need to grow in order for that to happen, but we don't start with growth, we start with well-being. I'll stop there. I hope that helps. And it's just to the second part of your question there, Anne, yes, it's about going beyond GDP, but quite often these conversations get stuck at measurement, and measurement is really important, but it's got to be about a lot more than measurement as well. What we measure really matters, but I get frustrated when we don't go any further than measurement in these conversations. So WEAll is always trying to push to say, yes, measurement, but actually it's even bigger picture than that. If we have a vision for success and we work backwards, yes, of course, we'll measure things differently. And some of our project work, like with the Cairngorms National Park, is about developing new cornerstone indicators, new things to measure. That is part of the work, but it's about what's the point of the system? How is it designed in the first place? What are the different drivers behind decisions on spending and policy and business? And that's about a lot more than measurement.
Thank you. So there's another question in the chat from Maria that I think is...
Yes, what other economic transition movements are you cooperating with? Perfect question. Yes, so Economy for the Common Good and Donut Economics, the two that you've mentioned there, they are both members of WEAll, founding members of WEAll. Kate Rayworth of Donut Economics fame is one of our ambassadors. So there's a fantastic report that just got published yesterday by one of our members, which I will try and pop in the chat, or maybe Anna is better placed to find the link, that it literally demonstrates how all of these different frameworks and different concepts are all saying the same thing. So actually this was one of the founding purposes of WEAll, was to be this big picnic blanket, which is the metaphor that Catherine always uses, that we're rolling out a picnic blanket that all of these different concepts can be on, but what they've all got in common, what's at the heart of all of them, is well-being of people on the planet. So we absolutely collaborate and have done from the word go, and we don't want to confuse things with another term. It's quite the opposite. But if you want connections into those groups as well, then we can help with that, because we are all about collaboration. And Anna can hopefully find the shared ingredients of a wellbeing economy discussion paper, which is the best example I've seen of how to explain how connected these things all are. A perfect timing, Anna. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're coming to an end, but I just have one question. I don't know, maybe more on a bigger level, but it's like how sometimes I can feel, because these questions are so huge, and like when you're working with system change, which I mean, I think it's a crucial thing to be working, like you said, connecting the social issues with the environment, etc. But like sometimes I feel like it's easy to get lost in that. It's like, how do you to get concrete without, because when you start doing the work, you have to start somewhere, but without just focusing on one issue, because then you're losing the system's perspective. Like, how do you navigate like these really big perspectives?
Yeah, wow, that's a great question. And yeah, you've answered your own question to an extent, in that you've got to start somewhere. Where WEAll Scotland started in terms of like the first thing it actually did, as like, here we are, we're an organisation, we're doing a thing, was the first Wealth of Nations 2.0 gathering. So that was, we couldn't even have called it a conference then. It was a big conference when we did the third one, but the first one that we did was about 50 or 60 invited guests from our networks in Scotland, where we spent a whole day together mapping out the different potential intervention points for change in Scotland, and then prioritising what we do. And that then became the first strategy back when we were a volunteer organisation. So a gathering and a collaboration and crowdsourcing and co-creation focused gathering can be a really, really good first step, because no small group of people has all the answers. Everything that I've just explained to you about what we've done has had so many brains and hands involved in it, in different organisations, and it's messy and complicated to work that way, but that is the WEAll way of working. So I would encourage you to figure out the right first steps for Sweden by maybe organising something similar to that. And it might be that the programme and the structure that we used in our first Scotland one could be a bit of a template for how you do that. And the second part of your question about holding the systems level at the same time as getting stuff done, I think we should be really proud that that's a bit of a unique selling point. I hate using that sort of corporate language, but I think that is a bit of a selling point of WEAll does that when others don't. So there's lots of people doing incredible community development and visioning work and policy influencing, but we're in Scotland, we're the only organisation that is doing that with an explicit change in the economic system and constantly referring up to the systems level and making the interconnections between the different layers. And we bring in all the others who are doing that amazing work at the different, more granular levels in all parts of the system. So as a WEAll hub, think of yourself as a connector that's helping to make the most of everything that's already there in Sweden, not the ones that have to do everything.
Thank you, that was great. Yeah, so I think we have to wrap this up now, but so there is a contact list in the chat. You might have to scroll a bit up now. Maybe you should post it again, but there you can, yeah, Leo just posted that again. So you can, if you want to have more information about the events that we will organize with the WEAll Hub here in Sweden, you can sign up on this list. And for instance, we will tell about the first in-person gathering that will be on the 19th of March. So during the Vision Festival in Katrineholm, and we will send out more information there. But you can also follow. We still don't have social media for the WEAll Hub because we're that new. But you can follow Scenario 2030 on Facebook or Instagram, and there you will also find information. Yeah, I probably forgot stuff that I should say. Oh yeah, I want to say one more thing, that we have one more of these planned already that will be in April, when we will invite Amanda Yanu, who is a very, very interesting, very person from WEAll Global, who is in the US, and yeah, she's economics.
Yeah, she's economics and policy lead. So I am not an economist or like, but she's really the brains of the operation, but she talks about it in a really cool and interesting way. So you'll enjoy that one too.
Yeah. Yeah, we haven't decided exactly, because she has knowledge about a lot of stuff. So we haven't gotten into the details about what exactly we want to focus on in that yet, but you can save the date. It's April 20th. Yeah, so thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you so much everyone else for showing up and listening and asking questions.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and good luck with driving the unstoppable momentum in Sweden.